Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski. Who wins? Now, it doesn't take a genius to know that this is the biggest challenge that Alexander Volkanovski has ever faced now that he's moving up from featherweight to lightweight to become the two-division champion. But in this video, I want to break down this matchup, and by the end, I'll tell you who I think will win and how. Now, off the bat, I want to talk about their striking because this seems to be the aspect of the fight that many people believe that Alexander Volkanovski has his biggest advantage in. And yes, Volkanovski does have exceptional striking, and that was made more than obvious in his last fight against Max Holloway, in which Volkanovski put on an absolute boxing clinic. But I must say, when it comes to his actual KO power, outside of his fourth round finish of the Korean Zombie in his last fight before retirement, Alexander Volkanovski hasn't had a finish since 2018. On the other hand, we have the UFC lightweight champ Islam Makhachev, and while he isn't necessarily known for his striking, he has had some finishes on the feet and was able to knock Charles Oliveira down in his last fight, leading to the fight-ending sequence. That being said, I do think Alexander Volkanovski does have the advantage when it comes to fighting on the feet, even when factoring in the size advantage that Islam has at 5'10", while Volkanovski is 5'6". But unfortunately for Volkanovski, this is MMA, not kickboxing, and this is where he starts to run into trouble. Now, we know that Islam Makhachev is a world-class grappler and will be looking to take Volkanovski down and finish him on the mat. So the first question we have is, can Volkanovski defend Islam Makhachev's takedowns? So the best fight we can analyze to answer this question is Volkanovski's fight with Brian Ortega back in 2021. Alex came into this fight knowing the main thing he had to train for his camp was defending takedowns and defending submissions. And while Ortega has a strong jiu-jitsu background as his strength, he's rather mediocre at wrestling and isn't necessarily the best at getting the fight to the mat in the first place. But in this fight, Ortega was able to take Volkanovski down on multiple occasions. And one of the comments you'll always hear about this is, well, Volkanovski is shorter, so doesn't that mean he'll be harder to take down? And while that might be true in some cases, this is not one of them. In his fight with Brian Ortega, you'll see Brian uses an inside trip from the clinch to take Alex down, and the fact that Brian is the taller fighter actually makes this takedown much easier. Why? Because in clinches from the trip, the taller fighter is effectively leveraging their height to push their opponent both backwards and down. And so their inches of height over their opponent makes this motion much easier. And unlucky for Volkanovski, Islam specializes in such takedowns. There are plenty of examples of Islam Makhachev using such clinch trips against opponents that are arguably tougher to take down than Volkanovski is. So now that we know that Islam Makhachev is more than capable of taking Alex Volkanovski down, naturally the next question is, if Volkanovski gets taken down, can he get back on his feet? Now, when this question comes up, a lot of people mention the fact that Volkanovski was able to get back up a few times in his fight against Brian Ortega, but what they fail to mention is why. Now, while Brian may be an excellent pure jiu-jitsu practitioner, I must say he makes some risky and borderline stupid decisions in his fights on the mat. The biggest one is his proclivity to throw Hail Mary submissions off of his back and give up top control in hopes for a finish. Literally every time Ortega took Volkanovski down in their fight, he willingly switched to the bottom position and attempted yet another sloppy submission attempt, and when it inevitably failed and he blew his arms out, Volkanovski was free to get back up and keep the fight on the feet once again. And unfortunately for Alex, Islam does not have this bad habit. Anytime you see Islam take his opponents down, you'll notice he always maintains his smothering top control and only throws submissions from that position. He simply isn't willing to risk losing valuable top control just to throw a guillotine off of his back and blow his position. And this will make it very difficult for Alexander Volkanovski to create the scrambles that he needs to get back up on his feet. And so naturally, the next question is, if Volkanovski can't get the fight back to the feet, can he defend Islam's submissions? In his fight with Ortega, I must admit that Volkanovski did a great job staying calm when he was under pressure and defending Brian's submission attempts. But in reality, especially in the case of the triangle attempt off of his back, Ortega made outright sloppy decisions that cost him the win. See, when Brian throws the triangle, while at first he did have it locked in, he attempts to leverage it to move towards top position, and in the process he accidentally lets go. And instead of committing to taking top position, he hesitates. And even worse, when Volkanovski slowly attempts to get back up, leaving his entire back exposed, Brian makes a failed attempt to take his back and falls right over him. And anyone that's remotely familiar with Islam Makhachev knows that he will not be making such blatant mistakes on the mat. Overall, when Islam Makhachev takes Alexander Volkanovski down, I believe that Islam will take his time at top position, and it seems almost inevitable that he eventually does find the submission. And even on the feet, while Volkanovski may have the technical advantage, the fear of the takedown will most likely hinder his ability to get off the combinations that he would need to do damage. So So with all of these factors in mind, I think Islam Makhachev is at least 75% likely to win this fight. And I think the only possible pathway to victory for Volkanovski, in my opinion, would be for him to essentially point fight and consistently circle the cage while throwing kicks in hopes of winning a decision, similar to how he did in his first fight with Holloway. But even that, in my opinion, would be extremely difficult to pull off for 5 whole rounds. And since simply picking Islam Makhachev to win at -400 is essentially worthless, if I were to pick how this fight goes, I believe Islam Makhachev wins this fight inside the distance. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe button for daily MMA content, and be sure to watch these 2 videos right here for my breakdown for 2 massive MMA fights and who I believe will win them. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.